Hey y'all, today we're going to be talking about baby's first foods. I have 3 children. I've actually fed each of them differently, but I've been asked several times what we are currently feeding our youngest daughter, and she's the most pro-metabolic eater we've had yet, the very ancestral type foods. We talk a lot about nourishing your family on this channel, so let's just jump into what we feed our babies when they're around 6 months of age. So first of all, we actually sometimes feed our children before 6 months. Anywhere between 4 and 6 is the marker that I'm aiming for. And I don't really go by all of those markers that they request that you go by. Do what you want to do. Feeding your children is your choice. You are capable of making that decision for your children. But honestly, I think my daughter's first food was around 4.5 to 5 months, and she was just tasting food off of my plate. It was a soup dish, and she had just a little bit of broth and maybe a tiny sliver of like stewed meat in there. So we start when our children show readiness, and we use foods that are easy to digest, so we're not going to harm their digestion system. So I want to say that when you're learning new information like this, sometimes it can make you feel guilty or triggered as a mom, make you fear that you've messed up your child, and I want to encourage you that you haven't. Like I said, my first 2 children did not eat this way, and they are wonderful eaters now. We've had to help their digestion along a little more than we probably will with our 3rd child, but you haven't ruined your child. You can only go up from here when you learn new information, and I think as parents we often feel guilty. I myself have. When I learned some of these things I'm going to share with y'all today, I was like, oh my goodness, I gave this to my child and I shouldn't have given it to them this early, and now I've just ruined their digestion. I've got to go back and fix all these problems, but it is okay. Children are so resilient. They will bounce back from whatever you have fed your child, and just look up from there, learn more, research more, and you can always strive to be better. That's what I'm always encouraging on this channel, what I'm always striving for myself and my family. So here are the first foods we feed our children: bone broth, pastured organic meats, including organ meat. So I've made pureed liver pate, very finely shredded stewed meat that was out of a soup, or just very well mashed. I've even blended it in the blender when she was too small to chew it. And a lot of this would just be meat I poured out of whatever we're cooking. I don't actually cook special foods for my children, my babies. They just eat what we eat, and I just kind of prepare it in a different form so that they can swallow it, chew it, and not choke on it. So liver pate, I'll tell you in a minute how I make that. We also focus on egg yolks from our backyard chickens. I have done raw egg yolks mixed with raw cream or breast milk, just very nutritionally filled for young babies. And you might be thinking, raw egg yolks, you feed that to your child? Yes, I do. We consume raw egg yolks as our whole family. I consume them pregnant, so I feed them to my child. That's a decision you have to make and know the source you're getting these ingredients from. Same thing with raw dairy products. We drink raw milk. We feel completely safe drinking that. I drank it during pregnancy. I drink it during breastfeeding. I continue to drink it. Our whole family drinks it. My infant drinks it. Of course, she's still nursing throughout this time as well as we're introducing these foods, but we don't fear these raw foods, and we know the sources that they're coming from. So we include raw dairy from the form of raw milk, things such as yogurt, kefir, cottage cheese, raw cheese that we homemade, and then fruit, very well cooked or very ripe fruit that's easy for children to digest, and then little bits of seafood in the form of oysters and things like sardines. And then a favorite of ours that we make all the time are homemade gelatin gummies. This is a favorite of my toddler age children as well as my infant. A video sharing how I make our gummies. You can also make jello with them, but those are the first foods we focus on. If those are not the first foods you focused on, like I said, you can only learn more, research from here. For the liver pate, I've shared on this channel before, but that's one of the main things I fed my child that's so different than what I fed my other children. So liver pate is so nutritious. It's filled with liver, bone broth, high quality butter. So all I do is cook my liver very lightly in a lot of butter. So ghee or grass-fed high quality homemade butter is best, but use just a high quality butter. Cook your liver down in the butter till it's soft. Don't overcook it, because if you overcook liver, it gets very hard and very tough. Once it's just slightly cooked, in a blender with some bone broth. I've talked many times about bone broth. I've shared how we make bone broth on this channel. Homemade bone broth. Blend it in the blender until it's smooth, like a paste. And I forgot to add, you have to add salt to the blender when you're blending up your pate. It is not good without high quality salt. And then my toddlers actually will eat this spread on toast. Sometimes my toddlers are picky about liver. Some days they'll eat it, some days they won't. But my infant will eat it non-stop. She'll eat it by itself, she'll eat it on eggs, she'll eat it on literally anything, because I fed it to her from the start. So you get it into a paste, and then I will keep some in the fridge to add to her meals or just to give her as a snack, and I'll also freeze some in little silicone molds to put in my freezer, so I have this ready to go on hand. And I only have to make this pate about every 2 weeks because I make a large batch of it, freeze it, and pop it out as needed to feed to her and add to her meals. I myself don't love the taste of liver, but I have acquired a taste of liver pate spread on sourdough bread. It's not as bad as you think, and many times I think parents don't feed their children these types of ancestral foods because the parent themselves don't eat these types of foods. And I have just had to try to acquire my taste for that. The more I eat it, the more tastes of it she gets through my breast milk, and just the more likely she is to learn to have a palate for these foods, these very healing ancestral foods that 100, 200 years ago, children would have eaten just normally. They wouldn't have been trying to feed their children rice cereal and specific baby foods filled with starches and such. And again, I'm not trying to guilt anybody here. I know it can be very guilty hearing these things. And when I first learned all of this, I had already fed 2 children. Basically, I was in the midst of feeding my second child and was like, wow, I've fed my children the worst things I could ever have fed them. So one of the main foods we avoid are starches and grains. And I had some misconceptions about this with my first 2 children. I'd always heard don't feed children grains or starches until they're after 1, and then I also heard after 2. The truth of that I've since learned is you shouldn't technically feed children grain and starches until their molars come in. So the reason we don't want to feed our children starches, grains before their molars is because our mouths produce an enzyme called amylase, and it is in our saliva as adults. As young children we have it, but babies don't have enough of this yet. So until their first molars come in, they don't have enough amylase to properly break down that starch so that they can properly digest it. So if you're giving your child grains, starches, before they have enough amylase to break it down, it can cause digestion problems, things sticking to the walls of the digestive tract, and cause future problems from here. So I'll just give you a little bit of a story. My second child probably had grains before my first and then my third, just because she was a second child. She saw her older sibling eating stuff and she wanted these things. She is probably the most difficult eater for us now, as far as only wanting to eat fruits, breads, and stuff. And I look back and I think it's definitely because we probably fed her those grains a little too early, and we've had to try to repair her digestion, and we're working on that currently, and it's a lot. And if you just don't introduce the problem to start with, you don't have to go back and fix it. But like I said, it's not a big deal to try to reverse and help your child do better from there. But that is the ultimate reason we don't feed grains and starches before the molars come in. So I will admit, my child has had bites of potatoes, she's had bites of sourdough bread, she's had little bites here and there of foods off of my plate or things that she just reached for. I'm not concerned about that. You can definitely monitor your child and see how they're digesting these foods, monitor their bowel movements and such, but we try our best not to feed those on a consistent basis. So that's things such as rice, potatoes, starchy breads, rice cereal, which is honestly one of the foods that is promoted to parents to feed their children as a first food. And it's just, our children are not properly ready to digest those things yet. And this is not knowledge that is taught to parents or told to parents by pretty much anybody. So that's why I'm sharing this. I've learned this from other sources and done some research on it myself, and have learned that that's just not how God intended babies to digest foods. And you might think, oh, my child, we're eating these delicious baked potatoes, French fries, and my infant's gonna miss out. No, they're not. We've been at several events and people are like, oh, give that baby such and such. And I'm like, we don't feed her that type of food yet. And like, people just don't understand. And I think a lot of times we're pressured into feeding our children these things that we know intuitively or our child is not ready for. And we just need to listen to our intuition a bit more on feeding our children. I read some stories of moms who had no idea that there was an enzyme in their child's mouth that wasn't producing yet, but intuitively they were like, I don't feel like my child needs these potatoes just yet, or this rice just yet. And it was just their motherly intuition kicking in. And I will admit, I didn't really have that with my first 2 children. I didn't realize that I had not done enough research and my intuition didn't just kick in there, but many moms will. So trust that intuition if you're feeling that this is just not something my child is ready for. This is actually a very easy way to feed your children. Most of this is things we're already eating, minus the pate. I do make that specifically for my child. And then I try to eat some and sneak it in my family's meals other places, but they're just not 100% on board for the pate yet. We're working on that. But my daughter, me and her, and any other future children will just enjoy liver pate together because I truly have acquired a taste for it. Again, please don't feel guilty if you've not done these things or you failed your child's starts like I did with my first two. We can't feel bad for what we didn't know. All we can do is learn, grow, research from there, and do better in the future and give our children better options with the means that we have. So thank y'all so much for watching this video, and I will see y'all in a future one.